In an age where the names of sports teams like the Redskins are on the chopping block, everyone is trying to be politically correct. But in the old Western movies that were very popular in years gone by, there was a popular phrase attributed to the Redskins warriors who used to be called Indians in the movies, but who are now Native Americans. They used to say that pale-face speaks with forked tongue. Just before Election Day in Virginia, not far from the state building where the childhood nickname of Lady Rebecca Rolfe is plastered on a wall that is supposed to be a tribute to indigenous people, Governor Ralph Northam and his rapper friend decided to take a symbolic attempt to resolve racial tensions that have produced riots and protests nationwide. And Ralph Northam, on the suggestion of his black friend Pharrell Williams, decided to make Juneteenth a paid state holiday. And he told of how he, Ralph's friend Pharrell, a Northwestern University dropout, had heard about the event in history and how it had inspired him to turn it into a rap song for others to also be inspired. And Dr. LAURANETTE Lee, the director of Educational Outreach Services at the Library of Virginia, strung a few historical black spirituals into a narrative to match the weaving on her Afrocentric attire to teach Virginians about how the 2 years after January 1st, 1863, when the Emancipation Proclamation was signed, the Union forces in the Civil War arrived in Galveston, Texas in 1866. Yes, 1863 plus 2 now equals 1866. So write that down. And on June 19th, the slaves in Galveston, Texas were informed for the first time, having missed an entire war, that they had been free. As a PhD, Dr. LAURANETTE Lee even took the time to explain to those who might be less educated that the name Juneteenth was a contraction formed by removing the number 9 from June 19th, which may have been quite a revelation, a welcome revelation for all of those who actually applauded that fact. But now for a moment, choosing 1866 when the state of Texas actually created a holiday, or 1865, the year in which the Union Army actually arrived in Galveston, to fill in the gaps of history not highlighted before the pre-election day announcement by the governor, it might be of interest to a real history buff to know exactly why the Union Army was in Texas on Juneteenth. As you recall, that is June 19th, but it's a contraction with the number 9 removed. Write that down. You don't want to forget that. Actually, by June 19th, 1865, most of the Confederate Army had surrendered almost immediately after General Lee entered a gentleman's agreement with General Grant at Appomattox Courthouse in April 1865. The event that had inspired John Wilkes Booth and several others, including Mary Surratt, the first woman ever hung in history, American history, to conspire to assassinate President Lincoln. And the only Confederate forces that were still waging war against the Union on Juneteenth, that is that contraction of June 19th without the 9, you recall, was the Indian cavalry of the Confederate Army, comprised primarily of troops from the Cherokee, Seminole, and Muscogee nations. It may come as a surprise to some educated and enlightened people that white supremacists in the Confederacy might actually collude with the Indians to defeat the Union Army. But there are several rational reasons why this may have occurred, if only you grab a handkerchief and recall the story of the Trail of Tears in the 1830s, an effort in which Andrew Jackson, founder of the Democrat Party, and whose statue was most recently attacked, played a prominent role against the Seminole Nation. But in politics and in war, quite often sheer necessity dictates that the enemy of your enemy is your friend. So, as they say in the movies, we smoke 'em peace pipe. Many of the educated and enlightened who are now clamoring to remove Confederate monuments appear conveniently to reject the argument that the Confederacy fought for states' rights, which has to be a component when you consider the contributions of the Indian nations during the Civil War, and forget the fact that the Confederates were predominantly members of the Democrat Party. And also they forget that the Republican Party arose because of the abolitionist cause, just as they also forget the fact that there were actually 5 slave states in the Union that remained with the Union during the war, including West Virginia, which seceded from Virginia, not so much to preserve slavery as much as to avoid being invaded. One of the primary reasons that General Lee himself chose to fight with the Confederacy, but certainly failed in saving his own home, whose estate was divided to form a freedmen's village located in the present location of the Iwo Jima Memorial, and which was the land that was dedicated for the creation of the Arlington National Cemetery. But the states' rights argument was certainly an incentive to independent nations of tribes, which even the Confederate Indian cavalry demanded segregation of battalions based upon the nation from which the cavalry was provided, and to avoid a member of another nation disrespectfully being in command of those in another. In fact, the first black or African American officer to be politically correct in the United States Army was Henry O. Flipper, a graduate of the United States Military Academy at West Point in 1877, who somehow they made very sure was court-martialed shortly thereafter. But the Confederate Army commissioned Chief Whiting of the Cherokee Nation as a brigadier general in charge of troops. Not what you would expect from white supremacists in the Confederacy. Not every Indian nation, indeed, joined forces with either side during the war, but rather took full advantage of the pandemonium, much like current-day agitators and protesters. The Apache were a prime example in Arizona and New Mexico, while the activities of the Sioux, the predominant Indian presence on the Great Plains, set off uprisings that caused the Union Army to dedicate a special force to quash the rebellion from 1862 to 1863, while having to wage a civil war. The Comanche of Texas, with the reputation of having the best cavalry since the days of the Spanish occupation, also worked as free agents during the Civil War. But during a radical reconstruction, passionate partisan bickering actually led to efforts to aid the Comanche and acquiesced in attacks against settlers until 1871 because they wore the wrong hat. Just 2 years later, in the city of Alexandria, the first and last Republican mayor was elected in a coalition with newly emancipated slaves. And the official website for the city of Alexandria actually boasts that it was the coming of Jim Crow that ensured that that would never happen again. The same Democrats who actually replaced the Arlington Public School Board to defy the mandate of the Supreme Court in the landmark decision of Brown v. Board of Education, where Chief Justice Earl Warren stated that education is perhaps the most important function of state and local government. While today, even a Dr. King would not have to urge anyone to miss school or miss work during his mountaintop speech, because many state governors had already declared a state holiday without pay before Ralph Northam made Juneteenth a holiday. But what is now lost in the celebration of Juneteenth are the contributions of Native American cavalry soldiers, whose raids and skirmishes provided examples for modern warriors engaged in special operations, even if they were somewhat lackadaisical when it came down to administrative paperwork. Movie audiences can go to movie theaters to see a Morgan Freeman serving as a senior enlisted soldier, or watch Denzel Washington, a buck private, saving the flag of his regiment in glory, while the achievements of a historical figure like Brigadier General Whiting are forgotten in a sanitized history where a childhood nickname like Pocahontas is more politically correct than a name like Lady Rebecca Ross. Ironically, even the story of pandemic crisis that began in Washington State and the Great Pacific Northwest finds forgotten reminders of a forgotten legacy of Native Americans in gentrified locations like Skagit County, where participants at a choir rehearsal found a community infection take hold from a novel coronavirus. Or Snohomish County, the home of the American Patient Zero, all named for Indian tribes that in a former time and age occupied those territories. And who can forget that even the island of Manhattan, with all of its wealth and beauty today, is an Indian name for a territory purchased for just $24 in trinket. Because, politically correct or not, pale-face speak with a forked tongue. My name is Major Mike Webb, and I am running for U.S. Congress with liberty, honor, and excellence. By God, we shall make America great again. Honest.
In the shelter of your carriage day, 'cause I am a seeker and you are a keeper. You are a leader, won't you show me the way? Oh, you're a mountain from which there flows a fountain, so let its water wash my sins away. 'Cause I am a seeker and you are a keeper. You are a teacher, won't you teach me the way? Reach out and lead me, guide me and keep me in the shelter of your carriage day. 'Cause I am a seeker and you are a keeper. You are a leader, won't you show me the way?
This advertisement was authorized by Mike Webb.